Okay, welcome colleagues and guests. Good evening. I'm the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Science here at Birkbeck, and it is my great pleasure this evening to introduce Professor Elisa Rafael Lefebvre, who will be presenting her inaugural professorial lecture, Prisoners of Gravity, How Gravity Shapes Our Brain and Behavior. Elisa joined the School of Psychological Sciences here at Birkbeck from Royal Holloway only a few years ago as a senior lecturer in 2021. She was promoted then to reader in 2022 and to Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience in 2023. And since then, has done nothing. But also in 2023, she took on the really important role of head of school of psychological sciences, something which I'm still very indebted for. So Elisa's academic journey started at the University degli Studi di Pavia, just outside of Milan, where she completed her MSc, well, her BSc first, then her MSc, and then her PhD in psychology. She then moved to London in a postdoc position at Patrick Haggard's lab, working on vestibular cognition, extending the work of her PhD. It was around about then, less than 15 years ago, that Elisa had her first contact with Birkbeck. She was a demonstrator on our undergraduate research methods program. Not many of our demonstrators go on to be head of department within 15 years. So that sort of says something, I guess, about Elisa's sort of uniqueness. But she is probably best known, I was going to say she's best known for X, Y, and Z, but actually she's best known for energy and enthusiasm, I think. She is a passionate researcher, passionate teacher, educator. Has proven to be a really strong and effective, extremely capable leader of the School of Psychological Sciences. But beyond her enthusiasm and her energy, she is known for her love of the brain, her love of space, her love of the vestibular system, and of cats, and of fashion. And I do not think I've had a single conversation with her that hasn't had at least two of those in it. So anyway, without further ado, let me hand you over to Elisa to talk about Prisoners of Gravity.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you, Rick, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight. I can see a lot of colleagues, friends, students, family, and this means a lot. It really means a lot to be able to share this moment with you. Inaugural lectures are often a reflection on one's own academic journey, but I really don't want to go in this direction tonight. I rather prefer to focus on what my team and I are developing in the last few years. I would like to focus on the research that we are doing in the lab, and I would like to bring you on a journey into our lab, our research, as well as space. Now, you are in space. You are floating. Imagine that you are floating around. You are floating hundreds of kilometers far from Earth. And you have been living without gravity for weeks. At the beginning, it was rather fun. It's easy. You're floating. It's like a playground. But suddenly you realize that actually something strange might happen. You move your head and it's just confusion. It's disorientation. What is up? What is down? Where I am in space? Am I tilted? Is the room tilted? What do? I try to grasp an object, and the law that I know, what I'm used to do, is not longer the same. The usual rules don't apply, and our brain needs to learn how to adapt to this new environment. Look, this is not science fiction. This is what's happening in space. This is actually space adaptation. And tonight, I would like to try to answer this question. Can the human brain adapt to life beyond Earth? Can we live outside planet Earth? And in order to do that, we need to focus on what is gravity. What is gravity here on Earth? Albert Einstein stated gravity is the first thing which you don't think. Gravity is a constant feature of our environment. It's always there. We are in an environment in which Earth is pulling us with 1g acceleration. 1g is pretty much 9.8 meter by second square. Despite that, we don't feel gravity as we feel all the other environmental features. We cannot perceive it, we cannot feel it, we cannot touch it, we cannot smell it, as we see, touch, and smell all the other features in our environment. We cannot really consciously detect it. However, we are exceptionally good in dealing with an environment in which there is gravity. We are adapted to terrestrial gravity. I'm going to show you a ball. This object is moving according to linear motion, and you probably perceive that. But now, if I take an object here, and this is the scary part of my talk, and I drop it, you can see that the acceleration is different. So immediately you can detect that this object on the screen was moving according to linear motion, while the ball that I was playing with was moving according to gravitational acceleration. And not only we are able to detect different accelerations, whether objects move according to linear motion or not, we are also extremely good in detecting verticality, whether objects are aligned with the gravitational vector or not. You might have the feeling of being when you see one frame that is a little bit tilted in your room. Yeah, so that's because your brain knows what is vertical, and immediately you can spot what is not vertical. But we constantly use gravity for other things. We use gravity for our ability to walk around the environment, jump, run. We use it for postural control. We use it for motor planning. Think about when you're having breakfast in the morning and you're having this amazing Italian coffee. That's what I normally have. And the coordination that you need to do in order to drink the coffee means that your brain knows exactly the amount of gravity on your muscles, tendon, and can coordinate that to counteract and lift your arm. And you do that without effort. We don't really perceive, and we are so used to it that we just take that for granted. We also use gravity to navigate in the external environment as well as perceiving time. But how does our brain knows about gravity? Now, there is not really a single gravity detector. However, the vestibular system is one of the most important sensory modalities to detect gravity. The vestibular system is a tiny, small, sophisticated organ inside your inner ear, which detects each movement of your head in space and translate the movement according to linear and angular acceleration. So every time that you move your head, the vestibular system is going to tell the brain with just millisecond delay whether your head is upright, coherent with gravity or not. Now, our brain takes vestibular information and combines vestibular information with information from vision, from our limbs, proprioception, as well as our internal organs, and build together a model that is perfect for terrestrial gravity. And that's why, once again, you can drink your coffee almost without effort. And look, I've been obsessed about this model. So we know how the model is created by optimal integration of these sensory signals. But I've been obsessed about what are the features of this model. What can we say about this model? Is it innate? We have evolved under 1g terrestrial gravity. So is this model innate? Is it embodied? Is it flexible or stuck, fixed to terrestrial gravity? And is intuitive or not? And I'm going to briefly show you the research that we have done in order to answer these different questions. Is our internal model of gravity innate? Well, that's not an easy question to answer if you work with humans, as I do. It's a little bit tricky to get a brand new newborn and put them in the lab before they are exposed to gravity. What we did was instead using chicks, as the one that you can see here in the video. Now, these are newborn chicks that we can test immediately after they are born. Why chicks are so interesting? Well, they are cute, as you can see, but also they are fully functional at birth. Their sensory motor system are working perfectly. They don't need to learn. Somehow they are much more clever than us. So what we did was put in this newborn chick, and we can decide exactly when we hatch them, in an arena in which there are two different screens. One screen is presenting gravity-related cues, a ball that is falling according to gravity, and the other screen is presenting a ball that is moving against gravity. And we have a lot of different combinations. The ball is moving up, down, with linear motion, with gravity acceleration. And what we found is that the chicks prefer balls that are moving according to gravitational acceleration, and even more objects that are moving against gravity, meaning that they are familiar for objects that move against gravity. What does it mean that they prefer? Well, as you can see, they approach the part of the screen presenting the stimulus that they prefer. And they can do that because they have innate predisposition towards what they prefer. Now, this seems to suggest that our response to gravity are guided by innate intuition. So the model of gravity is potentially innate. Is this model embodied? Now, our behavior relies on internalized physical laws of different kind, including gravity. However, we do not have physical laws detector in our brain. That means that our brain needs to use whatever representation of gravity, our internal model, and then see whether the physical laws of our environment are coherent or not. We have been running a series of experiments in which we ask other participants, human, not chicks, to play this game here. So this is a virtual tour game in which there is a ball, which is our object, and the aim of the game is to put the red ball into this green basket. And you can see that there are a lot of gravity information happening here. There is a free fall and then an acceleration on an inclined plane. So in order to solve these games, you need to take into consideration the physics of this environment to do that. And importantly, this environment here has 1G terrestrial gravity feature. What we did? Well, we asked participants to play these games while they were sitting upright, but we were playing with the reliability of their vestibular signal. So we applied what we call galvanic vestibular stimulation, which is an artificial vestibular stimulation, in order to decrease the reliability of vestibular cue. Galvanic vestibular stimulation is a technique that I've been developing and working with in the last 15 years. And we normally put a couple of electrodes on the mastoid, which is the bone behind your ear. And we can send some current through that electrode, meaning that we can send current to the vestibular nerve, depolarize the vestibular nerve, and create vestibular sensation, even if participant is absolutely not moving. I know that it looks a little bit Frankenstein, but believe me, it's safe. Nobody died so far in the lab, which is great. And the worst thing that might happen is a very strong feeling of being drunk. So normally people like it. Anyhow, let's go back to the point. So they play this game and they do that during vestibular stimulation as well as a sham control condition. And what we found is that vestibular stimulation reduced the success rate in this game, but only for the game in which there is a very strong gravity information in the environment, suggesting that in order to internalize the physical laws about gravity, you need to have coherent, reliable online vestibular cues. Is the representation of gravity, our internal model of gravity, specific for 1G acceleration, which is terrestrial gravity acceleration, or can be flexible? Now, we have tested this hypothesis by looking at whether a gravitational advantage is present for non-terrestrial gravities. Gravitational advantage is an effect that we have demonstrated in different studies in which people are way better in judging the speed of objects that are moving downwards compared to objects that are moving upwards. And that's it. If I show you a ball that is moving according to terrestrial gravity, down, you are very good in judging the speed. If the ball is moving up, you are not that good. And this is the gravitational advantage effect that I'm talking about. Now, what we have done was using virtual reality, which is an incredible tool, to exploit visual capture, to expose participants into a Marshall gravity for a few minutes, and then asking them to do exactly the same task. But now, instead of using terrestrial acceleration, we are using Martial acceleration. Martial acceleration is about 0.3, which is 0.3 g, which is way less than terrestrial gravity. And we found exactly the same gravitational advantage, which seems to suggest that the gravity model per se can adapt to different gravity and is not fixed to 1g terrestrial gravity. And this is very interesting if you put in the context of space flight exploration, in which we might be facing different gravities. Can we actually detect the difference between terrestrial gravity and non-terrestrial gravity? Are you even aware about how terrestrial gravity looks like? Well, I cannot help myself and test you. I'm going to show you a stimulus is accelerating, and you need to tell me whether it's terrestrial gravity, yes or no. Ready? That's Mars. We are all on Mars now. This is Martial gravity 0.3 g. What about this one? Guys, I'm sorry. This is our gravity, 1g. So we have recently performed this task in which we have hundreds of these trials, and we ask participants whether it is terrestrial gravity or not. We use a D prime approach, it's a signal detection approach, which I love, and we can estimate the sensitivity to detect gravitational acceleration. So we basically look at how good people are in detecting signal when the signal is present, and in this case, detecting gravitational acceleration, which is terrestrial, when we do present terrestrial gravity signal. And again, we have done that with a ball that is moving upwards in an incongruent way compared to the direction of gravity, or downwards in a congruent way. And we found that sensitivity was much higher, significantly higher, when the ball was moving downwards, again, in a gravity congruent manner. So you are much better in detecting that this is terrestrial gravity when the ball is moving according to terrestrial gravity. Well, I say you, but you are not really good. Anyhow, this pattern is present only if the vestibular signals are reliable. Once again, when we apply destructive vestibular stimulation by means of our electrode on the mastoid, the sensitivity drop, and people are not longer that good in distinguishing between terrestrial compared to non-terrestrial. Now, sensitivity is a pure measure of perception. It's a pure measure of how good people are in the technical signal. It's not about bias. It's not about being confused. It's not about being in a strange environment. It's a pure measure of perception. And we found no changes in response bias, which seems to suggest that this effect is very specific. So gravity is understood without formal learning, but again, only if the vestibular input is reliable for us. I hope that I convince you that we have a very good internal model of gravity that allowed us to behave here on Earth. But what about space adaptation? What about being exposed to zero gravity, such as in the ISS, International Space Station? What about partial gravity on the moon, 0.16 g, or the partial gravity on Mars, 0.3? We'll be able to adjust to this environment. Well, we know that space is an hostile environment. It's a very hard environment for our body physiology. There are many things that happen in space, including changing in our heart functioning, because the fluids start to shift from the legs to the head. The muscles also shrink. There is no effort that needs to be done. So the muscles start to shrink because gravity is no longer there. And there is a change in bone density as well, about 15%. And this is only after being exposed to the space environment in zero gravity for a few days. Now, as I say, hydrostatic pressure is something that is happening in space. Gravity is no longer there. The fluids start to shift from the legs to the torso, to the head, meaning that astronauts do have this sort of puffy bottom face. And this is because of the fluids going up towards the face. The bones start to shrink, and another physiological change that happens in space is backpedaling. Now you can see an MRI of a spine before and after flight, and you can see that the space between the discs is much larger. Now, if you're short like me, you might think that's not too bad because I'm gaining some centimeters, I'm becoming taller. But this is also related to the fact that it's extremely painful to deal with. So a lot of different physiological changes. What about the brain? Now, interesting, there was not a lot of interest about human brain during space flight until a few years ago. And when we got the first systematic paper looking at changes in brain, it was only in 2016, really few years ago. So this is connectivity paper looking at the brain of one single cosmonaut being in space for 169 days. Now, they have looked at the connectivity, which means the connection between different brain areas. And they found that there was a decrease in connectivity for a specific area of our brain, which is the one highlighted in blue. That's the right insula, which is a vestibular hub for our processing. It's a real gravitational hub for processing vestibular signal. There was another study a few years later in which they have collected structural measure of cosmonauts and astronauts pre and post-flight, and they found there was an increase in ventricular volume after space flight, and this increase lasted for months after they came back from Earth. Again, it's not surprising because, as we say, the fluids start to shift and they go up. So it means that there is much more water somehow in our brain. So this is all very interesting, but obviously there are many things that are happening during space flight. Gravity is one of the main factors, but there is isolation, radiation, confinement, stress. And also, all these measures are not taken immediately when people come back here on Earth. I mean, they need to deal with other priorities rather than having an MRI. So what we are doing right now is looking at changes in our brain structure and function in a way in which we can have altered gravity in a controlled way. And this is our brain flight project in which we are looking at changes in brain structure and function induced by altered gravity by parabolic flight. So what is a parabolic flight? Well, it's a plane. It's like the usual plane that you would take for holidays, but rather than having seats, there are a lot of different experimental setups. And what we can do is using this particular facility to exploit the changes in gravity that the pilot is going to induce by performing some parabola. So during the flight, which lasts about 3 hours, the pilot is going to make some parabola, such as the one that you see here, in which we can experience different amount of gravity. Now, this is not simulated altered gravity. This is physical altered gravity. What do we have? Steady flight, so normal, boring flight. And then the pilots start to put the plane with this very high nose pitch. It goes up for a few seconds, about 20 seconds, goes up, 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 and then at some point the pilot just leaves the control and the plane is in free fall. During the free fall moment, we have zero gravity, weightlessness, such as the one that we can get in space. And then, because we don't want to die, the pilot takes control again, and what is happening is that we have another acceleration with the nose down in order to go back to steady flight. Now, because of this parabola, we can experience about 20 seconds of hypergravity, 1.8 G, so almost double the gravity that we have on Earth. 20 seconds of zero gravity, physical zero gravity, and 20 seconds of, again, hypergravity. Now, during the zero gravity, you can see that we can float around, and we can also perform our experiments. So here is the inside of the plane. Here is our experimental setup. And you can see that people are floating for a little bit of time, and then they smash on the floor when there is the 1.8 G acceleration again. And just one note, I can tell you what not to do during the flight. Play with your vestibular system, because this has severe consequences, which are this one. And yes, you need to have a vomit bag in order to deal with that. So we are still running the project, and I'm grateful to have my collaborators here. But I would like to tell you a little bit more about our preliminary data. So what are we doing exactly? We have different neuroimaging measures, and we test participants before the flight, during the flight, and after the flight. Before and after the flight, and here I'm really talking immediately before, immediately after, we collect data about structural MRI, connectivity, and functional MRI. Before, during, and after the flight, we also have EEG data, and we have EEG data for resting EEG as well as task-related EEG. We have a lot of data, and we only started to look at some of this data that I'm showing here. So those are connectivity data showing that the key areas for vestibular processing and gravity processing, such as the parietal lobe, superior and inferior parietal lobe, as well as the cerebellum, show altered connectivity after exposure to parabolic flight. Parabolic flight is about 3 hours, is not 169 days in space. So just a short exposure to altered gravity for a naive brain that hasn't been in space can cause a lot of changes. What about the brain function? Well, if there are changes in brain structure, very likely there are changes in brain function. One of the main issues during space flight is space motion sickness. Space motion sickness is affecting about 80% of astronauts in the first days, weeks, and is basically driven by a conflict between vestibular cues about gravity that are not longer there and visual cues. And what is space motion sickness? Well, astronaut Scott Kelly said that it's kind of like the worst hangover you have ever had, combined with seasickness and the flu. So it's not a great feeling. Space motion sickness, however, is not only nausea and vomiting, it's also involving other symptoms such as disorientation, poor sensory motor control, poor decision making, fatigue, brain fog. And that's one of the main reasons why astronauts are not really allowed to go for extravehicular activities in the first days of space missions, because they won't be able to perform as the standards. What about sensory motor processing? Here are footage of astronauts in the Apollo mission try to walk on the lunar surface. The moon has a gravity of 0.16 g, and they are only trying to walk. We are pretty able to walk on Earth without any significant challenge, but you can see that as soon as the comfort of our 1g gravity is no longer there, everything gets much more difficult, even walking around. So when you change the gravity, balance is impaired, there is disorientation, proprioception is not accurate. The amount of force that you need to use in order to manipulate objects is also altered. Coordination between your hands, between your head and your hands is very difficult, and locomotion is not as easy as you can see here. So there are a lot of things that happen during space flight when gravity is not longer there. However, there was not a systematic framework to look into what are these changes and which different cognitive domain gets affected the most. So we have entered an exercise in which we have reviewed the last about 15 years of literature, and we have taken every single paper, peer review published. We have looked at their results, and we have estimated an effect size for whatever funding they were reporting. And then we compute a model in which we wanted to look at which of different domains is more affected by changes in gravity. So we assume that during space flight, there is altered vestibular signal, there is altered gravity, and then we wanted to model which of these domains, sensory motor, cognitive, and social affective, is going to be affected the most, whether there is a spread effect or whether there is a cascade model. And what we found is actually a cascade model seems to be the most accurate in describing what's happening in space, such as that altered vestibular gravitational signals affect sensory motor control, and then this cascade into higher level cognition as well as social affective functions. So now that we have a neurocognitive framework, let's test these ideas in the lab. So we can place simulated gravity in the lab and see how people behave. I need to warn you, I'm going to present lots of data now. I'm not going into the details of the data, but I love data. And you're going to see a lot of dots. Each dot is a subject, doesn't really matter. I'm going to go very fast and show you all these experiments. So please don't be too afraid. So let's look at changes in sensory motor function when we simulate altered gravity in the lab. We have been looking into different perceptual processing, and I'm particularly keen on these results on pain. We don't like pain. I'm not mean. I don't like to see people in pain. But pain is an essential biological mechanism that protects our organisms. Knowing that something is painful is very important for us for survival. And we have been looking at pain perception during different gravity simulation. And here I'm presenting the data of an experiment that we have run with some of my dissertation students. So in the lab, we have a fancy table that is called 3D tilting table. We can place participants on this table, and then we can rotate them upside down or in many different orientations. We use two different alterations of gravity here. The congruent gravity condition, which is upright. So that's the best condition for your vestibular organ to say that I'm aligned with gravitational vector, or head down bed rest. In this condition, the head of the participant is 6 degrees below the feet. So it's in this sort of orientation, head here and feet here. And somehow your vestibular system doesn't like it. Gets the vestibular system crazy, doesn't like it, and it has been shown that this particular orientation can trigger changes in your vestibular processing similar to space flight. So that's what we can easily do in the lab. We get participants, we tilt them, and we ask them to perform different tasks. And in this task, we have a nice device in which we can exert force into the fingertip. Now, if I put a force in your fingertip, for a little bit of time, it's going to be just a force. And then at some point, it starts to become painful. I'm not asking people to tolerate pain, but I'm asking them to tell me as soon as possible when they start to feel pain on the fingertip. And again, orientation of your body is totally not relevant. And we found that the response to pain were significantly lower attenuated when people were in altered gravity simulation compared to upright. Interesting, when we expose our participant to VR simulated martial environment, which again is absolutely not relevant for the task, they have lower pain responses, suggesting that as soon as the level of gravity or as soon as the vestibular processing is not the usual one, pain is reduced. And please remember, not feeling pain and being a superhero in space is not great. So you need to have pain in order to protect yourself. What about motor responses? People are slow. When they need to press a button for a certain target, they are simply slow in motor responses. And even when we look at the interaction between motor process and sensory process, we found that this is altered. So here an example about predictive coding. We have been looking at sensory attenuation, which is one of the key mechanisms that our brain put in place in order to know that whatever sensory signal is generated by our own action, this signal needs to be attenuated. Sensory attenuation is very easy to show in normal circumstances when you ask participants to do an active movement, but when we alter gravity by means of vestibular stimulation, sensory attenuation was not longer there, suggesting that once again, gravity seems to contribute to predictive coding. A couple of examples about cognition and social affective behavior. We have shown in different studies that people are simply suboptimal in taking decisions when the usual gravity is not longer there. So they are not good in taking decisions. They got stuck. The cognitive flexibility, which is our ability to change strategy in function of the environmental feature, is not great. People seem to have reduced cognitive flexibility when the usual gravity is not longer there. And funny enough, they are willing to take risks. So when we ask participants to perform a risk-taking behavior task, an implicit risk-taking behavior task, they are willing to take risks, meaning that they have an increased risk propensity. Now, if you are on Mars, you really don't want to have poor decision making, being stuck with the same strategy and also taking risk. It's not really the best pattern of results. What about social affective behaviors? We have been looking into perspective taking in different papers, but I would like to present these results in which we wanted to look at how people perceive someone else's action. And what we have done here was asking participants to tell us whether these stimuli were human-like or not. How does it work? Well, we got an actor first, and we asked them to walk, such as this guy here, and the actor has a lot of tracker, and we can do this dot point display. So there is a real person that is moving around, and we can then do this recording. Now, we then compute a random generated pattern that has exactly the same trajectory of the dots, exactly the same velocity, but this is computer generated, so it's not human. And the task of our participant is to say whether the stimulus is human or not, is a human movement or not. And what we found is that people are really not able to do that, or in other words, they're very slow in doing that when they are tilted compared to when they are upright, suggesting that we might even use gravity to perceive other people's action, because we know that humans can only move with a certain of physical constraints in our 1G gravitational environment. And last but not least, what about disgust? Well, I talk about pain, I have to talk about disgust. So we asked participants to detect faces that portray a minimum level of muscular movement for disgust. So when you smell something that is disgusting, you normally do some sort of mouth-related movement. And we only use 10% of this movement, meaning that you can see a little bit of disgust expression, but it's very hard to see that. And we ask participants, again, to detect whether disgust is present in the face. Half of the time there is a disgust expression, half of the time there is a neutral expression. And what we found is that in altered gravity, in tilted orientation, people are not really able to detect disgust. And once again, disgust has an adaptive role, can protect us. So this is an overview of the experiment that we are running, looking at changes in brain function, in particular across sensory motor, cognitive, and social affective domain. And it looked like just changing a little bit gravity. I mean, I'm simply tilting people or apply some electrical stimulation, change a lot behavior. So what does this tell us? Well, I think that this tells us something very important about gravity here on Earth, which we might not think about. Gravity might be much more important than what we might consider. And I believe that gravity is an absolute reference for our behavior. I can see gravity as a prior, as a strong prior, probably the strongest prior that allowed us to behave in a terrestrial environment in an optimal way. The reason why we can walk around, we can drink a coffee so easily is because we have this gravitational prior that allowed us to move and behave optimally. If this is the case, the gravitational prior might contribute to very high-level cognitive representation that are not directly related to gravity. They are not directly related to sensing gravity. I would like to present you a couple of experiments that we have done looking at very high-level representation in order to convince you that, yes, we do have a gravity prior, and this is probably the strongest prior. The first experiment is related to embodiment. And I'm trying to say that Matt Longo and I, where are you, Matt? We designed this experiment in a pub several years ago. Yes, that was a real moment. So embodiment, we got interested in weight. I'm not sure whether it was the drinking. Well, I don't drink. I don't know whether it was Matt drinking, but at some point we started a conversation about weight and how do we perceive our weight. And we were thinking, well, if I'm standing, my weight is distributed on the both feet. If I'm lifting one of my feet, then I should have a different perception of weight, which I don't really have. So how our brain represents weight? How do we have a clear representation of how heavy we are. And we went back to our school textbook in which we realized that weight is given by mass by gravity. So that means that my body, which is a 3D volumetric object with physical feature, including weight, it has a weight only because I'm in a terrestrial gravitational environment. So if my body has a mass of 50 kilogram and I'm here on Earth, then my weight, according to Newton's law, is 50 kilogram. If I suddenly go to the moon or to Mars, the weight is going to change. So on Mars, my body will weigh about 19 kilograms because the amount of gravity is way less. Now, I'm not sure if this is a reason to go to Mars because Mars is a very hostile environment, but just to let you know that your weight will be way less. The mass stays exactly the same. So it's only the weight that is changing. And now I'm simply talking about boring Newton's law. What about the perceived weight? So is the perception of our own weight also going to change in function of the gravity that is experienced by our body? So if we change gravity, do we change our perception of weight? In order to do that, we went into another parabolic flight a few years ago, and we asked people to tell us the weight of their hand or their head. And we looked at the modeling of these perceived weight data, and we found that people had a perception of weight that was in function of the physical amount of gravity in which they were exposed, which means that our everyday experience of weight or our own body is related to the actual gravitational information. And by testing this experiment, we also realized that there is another interesting bias in our everyday perception, which we call terrestrial weightedness. This is a systematic underestimation of the weight of our hand. Can you do a little bit of testing with me? Can you just have your hand hanging around? How heavy is your hand? Quite light. Is your hand heavier than your phone? How many for yes? Only few people say yes. Your hand is about 400 grams, which is much heavier than your phone. However, you don't feel it. And we found that people has a perception of weight that is almost half of the physical weight. Now, we believe that this effect, this systematic underestimation of human weight, is something that our brain needs in order to make action, in order to manipulate objects. Basically, by cutting what is the real weight of our body, we can interact with objects without getting tired in a very easy way. Are you too tired? I give you another example of high-level changes in cognition by changing the gravity prior. What about the difference between what is real and what is unreal? Do you think that gravity can shape how we perceive reality? Well, I have been quite interested in this phenomenon for some of astronauts' reports state that they could see flashes of light in space. I was thinking about, well, flashes of light, that's interesting. But we were also hearing voices in space. So, okay, voices is even more interesting. So how is possible that people were seeing flashes of light and hearing voices in space? So I decided to look into this by testing participants in a flotation tank. Again, it's much easier than having people in space. And in this flotation tank, you ask people to float in water full of salt. There is no other sensory information. It's a tank that is absolutely closed, so there is no auditory information, there is no visual information. Indeed, it's called sensory deprivation tank. So they float there for an hour, and then we look at their experience. We ask them to fill in a questionnaire, and we found that they had a lot of experience that are related to vestibular processing. They feel like spinning, rocking, rotating around, very interesting. But they also have experience of seeing flashes of light, hearing sounds. That's interesting, but as you know, people might please you. So after 1 hour floating and relaxing, they just might come out from the tank and say whatever you want to hear in the questionnaire. So we say, can we systematically look at this effect by asking people to do a task pre and post flotation? And what we did was using something that is called visual the evoked auditory responses. So basically, we display to our participant these videos in which you can see that there is a gradient that is moving, and we ask participants to tell us whether there was any sound. Now, the trick is that there is no sound whatsoever, but people believe that there are sounds associated with this movement, like noise. And we also have a control condition in which there is only a frame that is not moving. It's important to have a control condition because we wanted to say, yes, this is absolutely related to the stimulus that can induce hallucination compared to the stimulus that cannot induce hallucination. And we found that only for the videos, there was an increase in the reported strength of sounds after flotation. As I said, there was no sound, never. So they heard loud sounds after flotation, even if there was no sound. And nothing happened here on the frame. Now, as space flight, flotation for an hour in a sensory deprivation tank can be a very, very unusual experience. So we wanted to know whether this effect is only because people are floating in a cool environment or whether it's related to vestibular processing. So you can guess what we have done. We get people in the lab, we stack our vestibular stimulation electrodes, we disrupt with a high frequency vestibular stimulation their vestibular processing, and we ask them whether they could hear sound and the intensity of sound. And once again, we replicate exactly the same results by having an increased intensity of sound for the stimuli that are videos compared to the frame. So these look like to be a vestibular specific effect rather than a general arousal effect. What does it mean? Well, it might mean that gravity helps us in shaping the sense of reality much more than what we thought. All right, so in conclusion, gravity. I really hope that I convinced you that gravity is not just a background signal in our environment, it's much, much more. It does not produce a phenomenological experience, such as all the other features of the environment. We cannot detect it, we cannot see it, we cannot smell it. It's always there. We cannot switch gravity off, it's always there. And is processed in a way that is unique. It's a pure multimodal processing, combining signals from vestibular, visual, proprioceptive, and internal organs. So I think that gravity is very much related to what we are and how we behave. It is a foundation of our behavior. But maybe there's a question that you would like to ask, which is, how does it feel to be in a different gravity environment? How does it feel to be for the first time on an environment that is not Earth? How does it feel to be on Mars? We know that Martian missions is something that has been planned. We might see the first human on Mars in about 20 years. So how is it going to be? How does it feel to be on Mars? So far, we only send a rover, and I do not have ethical permission to send a human yet on Mars. So how can we answer this question? Now, this is an exciting project that we have been running in collaboration with the Kazakh British Technological University, in which we have taken a lot of different parameters about body physiology, sensory motor performance, cognitive performance of people on the ISS, on the moon, or other simulated gravity. We put together all these parameters, and then we have been modeling different gravitational environment. And what we have done was using AI, and we have here using AI close to net, which is slightly better than ChatGPT. And what we have done was asking to AI, how do you feel now that you are on Mars? Given all the parameters that we know from studies on ISS, Moon, Earth, how do you feel being on Mars? And here the answer. My stride length is about 1.6 meters. My motor activity is about 40%. My heart rate variability is stable at 55 milliseconds. I feel alert as the gravity is enough to support familiar movements while requiring less energy. I'm self-aware. And maybe this is not surprising because it's not science fiction, it's adaptation to space. We are able to adapt, and being human means rewriting limits rather than obeying them. And on this note, I need to say a big, big thank you. And here is the sobby part of my talk. All right, so thank you to the Vestibular Neuroscience Lab that you can see here in the first couple of rows. Postdoc, PhD students, research assistants that are working with me. It's a pleasure to work with you. Thank you very much. You are doing the hard work. Thank you to my Verve colleague, and in particular to Matt. It's a great pleasure to work with one of my best friends. And thank you to my mentor, Patrick. Excellent supervisor during my PhD and postdoc, and a mentor through all this journey. I won't be here without you. Thank you to all my collaborators abroad, in Europe, Japan, Kazakhstan, everywhere, Canada. Thank you so much. Thank you to my mentor, Martin and Rick. It has been a journey in the last few years, so thank you for always being there and supporting me. Thank you to all my Verve colleagues at the back. It's a pleasure to be in such a nice, friendly department. I feel like being home. And thank you to my friends. It has been a little bit of a roller coaster, and you're the only one managing my drama. So I love you. And thank you to my family. Thank you to my parents, Vilma e Graziano, I miei genitori. Mamma e papà, grazie per tutto. La nonna, my grandma, my partner, Gregory, well, my fiancé, Gregory, thank you for being so good. Last but not least, Stephen Theodora, my cat.
Down now, and you relax. You can stay here if you want.
No, perfetto, sit down.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. My name's Patrick Haggard, and I had the privilege and pleasure of working with Elisa over several years as a PhD student and as a postdoc. I'm hoping that you can hear me okay at the back. Is the sound level roughly right? Good. Okay, thanks. So I was asked to give the vote of thanks after the inaugural lecture, and this is something which is sometimes done, and if it is done, it's done by the head of department or something like that. And it's really quite unusual to have an external person giving the vote of thanks. So I asked some senior colleagues and so said, well, what should I say? And give me some role models. And nobody had any idea about how an external vote of thanks should be given. So I'm just going to say what I think. I'm just going to say, I'm going to make a few comments. And I'm going to make a few comments partly about Elisa and about her wonderful work, but you've heard all of that already. So I'm going to try to channel what you've heard and to reinterpret it, perhaps particularly for the benefit of those of you who are not yet Birkbeck professors. So these are the things that perhaps early career researchers can really learn from what we've heard from Elisa today. So first of all, thank you for the fantastic lecture, for the fantastic research, and for the distinguished contribution to the field over the years. What can we specifically learn from what you've done? Well, the first thing I'd like to point out is something about the occasion. So academics very often complain. They complain a lot. And actually, I think this is not really good. We shouldn't complain too much because we're really, really lucky. We've got a good job and we can enjoy it. And that's an enormous privilege for which we're really grateful. And I think that's something that you know, you don't complain. But I'd like to draw attention to what a wonderful moment this is. Although we shouldn't complain about anything, there are two things which are particularly happy occasions in our job. There are a couple of moments which are real high points. One of them is the PhD Viva, when people get their doctorate. That's a really good celebratory moment. And the other is the inaugural lecture. So I think today is a really nice example of one of these points where we can be even happier than usual and even more enthusiastic than usual about the job that we do. And I think we've seen a very good example of that. I'm going to tell just two personal anecdotes. There were two things, two specific phrases that I remember Elisa using when she was in my lab. So I met Elisa initially through her PhD supervisor in Italy, and I invited her to come and visit London. And at the end of the few days that she had spent visiting London and looking at the lab, she said to me, I really want to come and work here. And I think it's really good that you said that. It's really good that you said that, because you did. You came and you worked here and it went really, really well. But there's a message, say what you want. It's really, really useful just to say clearly what you want. For a start, it makes it easy for people to help you. It makes it easy for systems to help you. It makes it easy for you to find your place within the chaos of institutions and universities. So thank you for saying clearly what you wanted. That was very useful. And then the other phrase that you had, which was very nice, was sometimes we would be sitting together in my office discussing data or discussing something. And Elisa would say, I've been thinking, and you said it with this sort of mysterious, slightly, what's the word, with a frisson. And then there would come out some really interesting idea and some novel proposal and some creative suggestion for how to study the vestibular system. And it was just really, really fun. So we were able to have an environment where thinking was celebrated and encouraged. And that is the basis of all the great research you've done. And that's something which Elisa's career has really demonstrated. So a good model might be to try to make sure you can say when you have a meeting with your supervisor, I've been thinking, because that's after all what you should do. Okay, I'm just going to make a few comments about this wonderful research. So we've heard some fantastic research today, and for those of you who don't study psychology, there's something quite interesting here, because what Elisa's studying, as she said, is something which is always on. It's not an event. It's not a thing that happens. It's something that's always there. It's the background to mental life. And that makes it really, really hard to study. Typically, psychologists study something by having a condition where it's present and a condition where it's absent. And we've heard about the complicated steps that are required to study gravity present versus gravity absent. And I think studying this background of mental life, first of all, it's new. Secondly, it's a challenge for psychology. And third, I think we can learn a lot of very useful things about how the mind works by not just ignoring the background, but embracing the background. And the gravity is clearly part of this background to mental life. What can we actually learn from this research? Why is this research so clearly professorial level, which it clearly is? And I just want to highlight some of the great things about the research that Elisa's done, which you've heard, which you can take note of. So the first one is focus. One of the things you've noticed is it's all about gravity. So she has stuck throughout your career, you've stuck to a single focus, and you've become an expert, and a professor should be an expert. So that's just a wonderful feature of an academic career, to develop expertise in that way. But you can have focus as well as having breadth. So you haven't just repeated the same experiment hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, not at all. This is what the I've been thinking bit has given you, is an ability to explore in great detail across a range of different methods and topics while maintaining this focus. And that's really, really good. So always try the next thing, and you can do that. Rigor. We've seen the care and the attention and the appropriate methods used to develop the work. I think it's interesting to look at the range of method. We've had everything from signal detection to meta-analysis, which is really nice. And the final thing, which is perhaps the most important, is just look at the collaboration, look at the sharing, look at the community, look at the range of co-authors, look at the range of different partners and actors, all the way from astronauts to PhD students. And I think on the whole, we do our thinking best when we share. And I think your career has absolutely shown that. And by performing such fantastic science, you've given us a knowledge of vestibular cognition and a knowledge of the role of gravity in mental life, which I think is completely unparalleled. And I'd like to congratulate you on this fantastic achievement, Professor Perret. Thank you.